Hello and welcome to Fairly Critical. We are reviewing season one of Andor. I absolutely adored this season of television. I think it's probably the best thing I've watched all year round in terms of either movies or full seasons of television shows. It was amazing. The writing and directing of the show is some of the best in all of Star Wars. The dialogue is second to no other project on Disney Plus in Star Wars catalog here. Um, and what it really succeeds at is making the galaxy far, far away feel lived in again. You kind of got that feeling with Mandalorian and both seasons of The Mandalorian. To a lesser extent, you got that feeling in Boba Fett, but this show makes it just quite apparent how the conditions post the Empire's rise to power are affecting the average person in Star Wars' universe. I loved it. The characters' stories, their main story arcs throughout the 12 episodes perfectly mirror one another. We're not going to go in depth of that in this video because we'd be here for too long. We are going to do a story analysis video on the full season in a couple of weeks, but this video is just going to be a review of the season kind of more generally, and then in a couple of weeks we'll get a much more in-depth showing of how the pairs of characters that you see in this show have stories that compare quite nicely and bounce off of each other in a couple weeks. These 12 episodes of season one can be neatly kind of cut up into a handful of sections. The first three episodes can be considered the opening act. They were directed by Toby Haynes, who has worked on projects like Black Mirror and the single highest rated episode of Sherlock in the whole season of Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock. That would be season 2, episode 3. So if you hear he worked on Sherlock and you're like, oh god, no, it's before that show went downhill. It's like the highest rated episode according to IMDb at like 9.6, something like that. So it's his baby, the first 3 episodes, and they did a really good job at setting the stage and introducing us to our first 3 characters. That would be Andor, Luthen, and Inspector Karn, respectively. Those are the first 3 of our 6 main characters. You might be wondering why I'm not considering Bix to be one of the main characters. She is certainly an important character and probably could be considered a main character, but she doesn't have her own story arc necessarily. Bad stuff happens to her, but it's mainly just to show the effect that it will have on one of the other main 6 characters. She's certainly important. I would imagine that she'll get more of a arc in season 2, but in season 1, she's an important but not a independent character. So I don't consider her part of the main 6. Andor, Luthen, and Karn are the first 3 of the 6 that are introduced. The others will be introduced later. But what I really want to talk about in these first 3 episodes is the flashback sequences, which are really, really good. They matter. If you look at flashback sequences like in the Book of Boba Fett, they really didn't jive well with the story. They showed information. It was good information to have, but they didn't tie in with the main story very well. In that show, it would show, him joining the Tusken Raiders and being nursed back to health and everything in the flashback sequences. And then in the actual main storyline, he'd be, going to a bar and just now becoming and introducing himself as the Major Domo. And it was important information that the flashback sequences shared, but they didn't tie in very well with the main story that was going on. This show, it didn't have that problem. The flashback sequences of Andor's past in the first 3 episodes are very well tied in and mirror what's going on with him in the present day. As he's like, I'm looking for my sister, and then in a flashback sequence, it introduces us to his sister, and it ties in as those 3 episodes play out. It's the first time his friend is killed, and then in the present, it shows some of his friends going through rough times, and it culminates with Luthen meeting him and taking him off world in the main storyline. And then in the flashback sequence, he meets his adopted mother, and his adopted mother, well, I mean, kidnaps him, but not in a bad way, in a loving way. Like, I'm rescuing you. But a similar thing, kind of takes him out of his childhood home and brings him into a life of adventure. And here Luthen is doing the same thing. So they tie in very, very well with each other. I absolutely loved it. The flashbacks actually stop after episode 3, which I think is probably important. They serve their purpose, and I mean, that's not technically true. They technically showed some of his adoptive father being, teaching him some lessons and being killed. And again, those did tie in with the story, but they largely stopped after episode 3. Episodes 4 through 6 what I consider the developing act. This is what these cover the events of Aldhani and introduce us to the last of the three six. I'm sorry, the last of the three. No, the final 3 of the 6 main characters. That's what I want to say. Those characters are Mon Mothma, Vel, and Lieutenant Miro. And those are you're probably wondering, is like, why did Vel have, and why am I considering Vel a main character? Again, we'll go into that when we go into our analysis video of how the plots mirrored each other. But Vel actually has a independent story, an independent arc for her character that mirrors Mon Mothma's, which is why I'm considering her a main character. She really didn't have a lot to do in these episodes 4 through 6. I mean, she did, but it's, with sharing the screen with Andor, who carries most of the narrative weight. Susanna White directed these 3 episodes 4 through 6. You might, if you've seen projects like Our Kind of Traitor or Generation Kill, she directed those projects, and you can really feel that with how well crafted and well shot the dialogue with Andor and the other team members on Aldhani is. It really drives the drama of the script for these 3 episodes. So I think she did a great job with it. I loved it. The events on Aldhani will really drive the narrative for the last half of the season. So it was very important that these 3 episodes be done right, and I think that they were knocked out of the park. What's cool about these 3 episodes, they'll also start showing us the moves that the Imperials are making, that the ISB is making, trying to piece together what's going on. That's where Lieutenant Miro's arc starts off. It'll also show kind of the financial side of the rebellion and how Luthen is trying to pay for it, and how Mon Mothma is trying to pay for it, and the dangers that side of things pose to the both of them, but namely Mon Mothma. I love these 3 episodes. The first 3 episodes of the show are much of a slow burn, and I like that. That's just character development. If you're wondering like why there isn't an action sequence like every 30 seconds, it's because if you do that, it sucks. We've seen that, like, when action is just put in there for the sake of action, and it's mindless, and it might look cool, but it really doesn't have a point. I would say that probably happened in Obi-Wan a little bit too much. It wasn't drastic, but it was like, there doesn't need to be some of this when you could just sit there and develop the character a little bit. But I digress. We're here to critique this show, not Obi-Wan. But I think that the first 3 episodes were a slow burn, which I appreciate. I know not everyone does, but when you get through those first 3 episodes, it will start to kick into gear. These 3 episodes are also a little bit of a slow burn, but they're a slow burn that is going to lead up to something narratively. Like, they say, hey, in 3 days, we're going to knock off this Aldhani base. So it's like, not like the first one where it's like, yeah, not the first 3 episodes where it was like, yeah, we're going to do something, but you're not hinting to the audience what that something is going to be. In these 3 arcs, you know what's going to be. So rather than it being a slow burn without a clear end game, it's a slow burn that is building up to something very specific. And so it just kind of helps build suspense and build anticipation. So I really like these 3 episodes. Episode 7, entitled Announcement, is the pivot point for the season. So it's after the Aldhani arc has the build up to the Aldhani raid. that has concluded. Now we have to see what the aftermath is, and we will really be seeing what the aftermath is for the next 6 episodes. But episode 7 is really the start of that. Um, the remaining by the end of this episode, the remaining 6 characters, or the 6 main characters that I've mentioned, will find themselves in some type of prison um, that is perfectly tailored to their own story and their own character. But before we get into that, this episode, as well as the rest of the 6 episodes, so all episodes 7 through 12 were directed by Benjamin Caron, who directed the last episode of Sherlock, and then as well as 11 episodes of The Crown. So if you're a big fan of The Crown, you've probably seen something directed by him. He's directed more episodes than anyone else. But that episode is kind of a catch-up episode. It'll show all 6 of the main characters at some point or another, and how their failures, either in the first 3 episodes or in the second 3 episodes, are affecting them. Failures or successes in the case of the Aldani team. And that will lead us into the arc that I am naming The Prisons, which is episode 8 through 10. This is where they're all in some type of prison of their own making, or that perfectly is suited to them, or something. So you'll have the free-spirited Cassian that is placed in a legitimate actual prison or labor camp, and is forced onto an unforgiving routine. And so that is the perfect prison for his character. Former Inspector Karn is placed in a bureau, in just a bureaucratic nightmare where his skills as a detective and his zeal to protect the Empire are just kind of wasted. And in addition, his mother just disrespects him at every turn. Again, when we'll talk about how his arc mirrors Andor's in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. Senator Mon Mothma will scramble to find a way to hide her financial dealings, and deal with her husband that she just loathes, while battling in a Senate that no one cares about. Vel, excuse me, Vel will struggle with the cost of supporting the rebellion that she is all in on. She's a believer in, but she'll have to struggle with being asked to kill Cassian, as well as the cost of trying to keep her romantic attachment to Clinta intact, which Clinta is very good at saying, you come second to the rebellion. And I think that Vel also agrees with that, but she's just kind of hoping that, yeah, I might come second, but I could still have more. So there's her prison is more internal than anyone else's, I think, except for maybe Luthen, who has to struggle to balance the need to restrain his actions in order to protect his identity, and the network that he's built up under intensified scrutiny following the events on Aldani. He also has to try and keep dealing with like Saw Gerrera, who comes into place and things. He doesn't really have an effect on the narrative. He just is there to really give us an example of like kind of the hardship that Luthen is facing, kind of like the negatives of what he's doing. Even though Luthen kind of represents the negatives as it is, he's having to make really tough decisions that will lead people to their deaths. But Lieutenant Miro, on the complete opposite side of this, will struggle to outmaneuver her political opponents in the ISB and come out on top, as well as try and identify and convince others that Luthen is in fact a real threat in these 3 episodes. But again, she'll come out on top on that argument, and that will lead us into the final 2 episodes 11 and 12, the conclusion episodes, where all of our main characters, with the exception of Mon Mothma, will travel back to Ferrix, or travel to Ferrix in the case of Miro. She's never been there before. And this is where the final showdown will be, back where it all began, like good storytelling always is. I'm halfway kidding. Yeah, halfway kidding. I liked it. I thought it was great. And we finally got to see the dude who was banging on the iron block, kick someone off that tall tower, which we had to know was coming. I mean, that was just going to happen. But the loss of Cassian's mother really jumpstarts the rebellion on that planet. She meant so much to the people on Ferrix, and her death and message to them will culminate in the beginning of the rebellion on that planet. as well as the solidification of um, Andor joining the rebellion. I think Andor, because Andor's arc is, he's a free spirited guy. He doesn't like he doesn't like the Empire, but he's not a full rebel yet. He's only being paid when he's on Aldhani. That his conversations with people start to put a seed in him that he might want to join the rebels. He denies that in episode 7, which is announcement, but then he gets put in prison for no reason. I mean, yeah, he deserves to be in prison according to the Empire based on what he did on Aldhani, but they don't know that. They just picked him off the street, didn't listen to him, and threw him into a detention cell. And so his breakout of that and finding out what the Empire really is, and then showing back up where his mom, who was a rebel, who had that rebellious spirit, who nurtured it in him, ultimately he denied it, but now that she's gone and what he's seen, he can't help but do anything but join the rebellion. This is the final 2 episodes. We'll see resolutions or halfway resolutions to most of our character story arcs. Andor will join the rebellion, which will give Luthen the excuse not to have to kill him, but instead to use him and help protect his identity. Vel, I don't know if I'd say Vel has a resolution to her storyline. That really just kind of keeps going, but I think now when we get into season 2 that she won't have to kill Cassian, that will develop a little bit more. Miro and Inspector Karn are now very much going to be a boss, a team, a supervisor and agent relationship, a handler and agent relationship. I think Karn there's no way he's going to be taken out of the game on this one. Which I think, again, I'm trying not to spoil too much. I can't wait to do the mirror, how these storylines mirror each other, how the characters mirror each other in a couple weeks. I almost did it right now this week, but I decided I needed more time to develop the script and get clips prepared and everything, and I didn't want to go off half-cocked. So I cannot wait for it, but because it is amazing story writing. Truly amazing story writing. And Karn mirrors Cassian so perfectly, as does Miro mirror Luthen, and Mon Mothma and Vel mirror each other to a lesser degree, but a significant one in terms of their internal struggles. But anyway, I loved this season. I thought it was amazing. I think it's the best thing Star Wars has put out probably since Rogue One. That's hard. Mandalorian season 1 was darn near perfect. If I'm going to critique anything about this show, and the reason it's that the age-old complaint about Star Wars, which is their hyperspace travel speed, the speed at which they can travel across the galaxy, makes zero sense. And when you hear that, I don't mean from a sci-fi perspective. Star Wars has never been a hard sci-fi universe. There's no reason for them to start now. But it's like, someone will make a comment and be like, hey, last month this happened on Ferrix, and then they're like, I'm on my way, and it's like only like half a day's travel in space, when it's stated elsewhere in the Star Wars universe that it takes like a week or 2 to travel certain distances. It makes no sense. Their space travel is inconsistent. Everyone shows up exactly where they need to be when they need to be there. They travel at the speed of plot, but who cares, because the stories are great. That is the one criticism I have for the show. It gets a 9 out of 10 for me. If you're wondering, like, that's the one criticism, I probably will never give anything a 10 out of 10. If I ever give anything a 10 out of 10, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit reviewing movies. I'm going to quit watching anything new. And whatever I rank 10 out of 10 is the movie I'm going to watch for the rest of my life. So 9 out of 10 for Andor. Great project. If you're a Star Wars fan, you're going to be extremely, extremely satisfied. If you're not a Star Wars fan, it won't matter. The stories are great. The writing is great. The characters are great. Everything is great about this. I highly suggest you look at it. I cannot wait for season 2. But that is going to be it for us today. Thank you guys so much for spending the time with us. We'll be back next week with an analysis video, and we will have the analysis video over this show in a couple weeks. I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.